Emotion value 10/in the 13 minutes between ignition and touchdown. 5 computer alarms screamed warnings that no one in mission control had ever seen in any simulation. And a 26-year-old guidance officer named Steve Bales had exactly 3 seconds to decide whether to abort humanity's first moon landing attempt. Emotion value 10/picture it. July 20th, 1969. 600 million people watching live across every continent. A dead president's promise hanging in the balance. And a yellow warning light flashing on a display keyboard 50,000 miles away from Earth. Emotion value 10/what would you do with 3 seconds to change history? This is the story of the moment when machines told humans to quit, and humans chose to trust their judgment instead. But here's the thing most people don't realize about that famous day. The computer that nearly aborted the moon landing was doing exactly what it was designed to do. The humans who overrode it were the ones taking the real risk. And that paradox tells us something profound about the relationship between technology and human judgment that remains just as relevant today as it was when Neil Armstrong's boot touched lunar soil more than 5 decades ago. To understand what happened during those terrifying 13 minutes, you need to understand what came before. The Apollo program had been running for 8 years by that summer of 1969. 8 years since a young president stood before Congress and declared that America would land a man on the moon and return him safely to Earth before the decade was out. 8 years of engineering miracles, budget battles, and 3 dead astronauts burned alive in a launch pad fire that nearly ended the program entirely. Emotion value 10/by July of 1969. That decade had nearly expired. Time had run out for caution. Time had run out for extensive testing. Time had run out for the deliberate pace that engineers preferred when dealing with the unknown. The moon landing had to happen now, or Kennedy's promise would die unfulfilled. The Earth-3 men chosen for this impossible mission could not have been more different from each other. Neil Armstrong, the commander, was a former test pilot so reserved that his own colleagues sometimes wondered what he was thinking. He spoke in complete sentences, weighed every word, and projected an almost eerie calm under pressure. During Gemini 8, when a thruster malfunction sent his spacecraft spinning toward disaster, Armstrong had calmly diagnosed the problem and saved his crew while his heart rate barely changed. That was the kind of man NASA wanted for the first moon landing. Bill Hager, the lunar module pilot, was Armstrong's opposite in temperament: brilliant, driven, and ambitious. Aldrin had earned a doctorate from MIT in orbital rendezvous techniques. His colleagues called him Dr. Rendezvous because he could calculate docking trajectories in his head. But Aldrin also struggled with the politics of astronaut selection, and he would later admit that being second on the moon left psychological scars that took decades to heal. Michael Collins, the command module pilot, was the writer of the group, articulate and introspective. Collins would later produce what many consider the finest astronaut memoir ever written. But on July 20th, 1969, Collins faced his own private ordeal. While Armstrong and Aldrin descended to the lunar surface, Collins would remain alone in the command module Columbia, orbiting overhead, unable to help if anything went wrong. For 21 hours, he would be the most isolated human being in history. Emotion value tense. The trouble began 93 hours into the mission, when the lunar module Eagle undocked from Columbia and 2 men began their descent toward a world where no human had ever stood. Collins watched his crewmates drift away through his window, the ungainly lunar module growing smaller against the gray expanse of the moon below. He would spend the next 21 hours orbiting overhead, passing behind the moon every 2 hours, completely cut off from all radio contact with Earth during those passes, unable even to see his home planet, unable to do anything but wait and hope. If something went wrong during landing, if the ascent engine failed to fire, Collins would return to Earth alone. He had studied the contingency procedures. He knew what he would have to do. The thought sat in the back of his mind like a cold stone. Emotion value tense, Armstrong and Aldrin faced their own kind of isolation. Once powered descent began, they would have precisely 12 minutes and 36 seconds of engine burn. 12 minutes to cover the distance from 60,000 feet to the lunar surface. 12 minutes in which any serious malfunction would mean death. Because there was no backup descent engine, no second chance, no margin for catastrophic error. Emotion value 10/that descent engine could only fire once. If it failed mid-burn, they would crash. If it ran out of fuel before touchdown, they would crash. If the guidance computer malfunctioned and aimed them at a boulder field, they would crash. Every scenario that involved the word abort during powered descent was simply a different flavor of disaster. But they had trained for this, hadn't they? The descent sequence called for the Eagle's descent propulsion system to ignite at 10% thrust, giving mission control time to verify engine performance before committing to full power. Armstrong and Aldrin ran through their checklist with the mechanical precision of men who had performed these steps 1,000 times in simulators. The engine lit. Telemetry flowed back to Houston at the speed of light. Everything looked nominal. Emotion value 10/HIN mission control. Flight Director Gene Kranz sat at his console and surveyed his team. Kranz was known for his intensity. His white vests hand-sewn by his wife before each mission, and his absolute intolerance for uncertainty. His controllers sat at their consoles in rows facing the giant display screens, each man responsible for a specific spacecraft system, each man's judgment potentially the difference between life and death. Then, at 20:05 Greenwich Mean Time, Buzz Aldrin noticed something peculiar. The navigation data didn't match their visual references. They were coming in too fast, on a trajectory that would bring them down approximately 3 miles past the intended landing site. Not dangerous, necessarily, but unexpected. In space, unexpected means concerning. In space, unexpected means something has changed that you didn't predict. And unpredicted changes have a nasty habit of killing people. Armstrong radioed Houston. Our position checks downrange show us to be a little long. Emotion value 10/little long. 3 miles off target on an approach that left zero room for significant error. But what could they do about it now? The descent had begun. The engine was firing. Gravity and momentum had taken over, and the only choices left were to land somewhere or abort entirely. Emotion value 10/Flight Director Kranz pulled his controllers. His voice carried the clipped authority of a man who knew that hesitation could kill. Each console reported green. Every system functioned within acceptable parameters. The trajectory was off, but not dangerously so. They could still land, just somewhere different than planned. At 20:09, Charlie Duke's voice crackled through Eagle speakers. Duke served as CAPCOM, the capsule communicator, the only person in mission control authorized to speak directly to the astronauts. His Texas drawl had become familiar to everyone following the mission. Eagle, Houston, you are go for powered descent. Emotion value 10/go. The word that meant no turning back. The word that committed 2 human beings to land on another world or die trying. The word that would echo through history, or be forgotten in the aftermath of catastrophe. 1 minute later, the alarms began. The Alarm-Itis-Cleed display. That small keyboard and screen interface that served as the astronaut's window into the guidance computer's silicon brain. suddenly flashed a warning that neither Armstrong nor Aldrin had ever seen in training. Program alarm 1202. Yellow warning light blazing. The guidance computer was telling them something was wrong. I imagine the moment. You're riding a pillar of fire toward an alien world. Your fuel is measured in seconds. Your only connection to home is a radio signal that takes 1.5 seconds to travel each direction. And now the computer that's supposed to guide you to a safe landing is screaming that something has gone wrong. Emotion value 10/what do you do? In mission control, 26-year-old Steve Bales felt his stomach drop through the floor. Bales served as the guidance officer, call sign Guido, responsible for the navigation and guidance systems that would either land Eagle safely or send it tumbling into oblivion. He had studied the guidance computer more thoroughly than perhaps anyone else in the program. He knew its capabilities and limitations. He knew what every status code meant. Except this one. He had never seen a 1202 alarm in any simulation. Not once. What he didn't know in that first horrifying second was whether the alarm meant the computer had failed, was about to fail, or was simply overloaded with too many tasks. The distinction mattered enormously. A failed computer meant abort. An overloaded computer might still get them down. But how could he tell the difference in the time available? Emotion value tense. Bales had 3 seconds to decide, maybe less. Emotion value tense/think about what that means. Not 3 minutes to consult manuals. Not 30 seconds to run diagnostics. 3 seconds to process an alarm he'd never encountered. Assess whether it represented a genuine threat to 2 human lives. And either abort humanity's greatest adventure or risk everything on a judgment call made with incomplete information. Emotion value 10/3 seconds. That's how long you have to read this sentence. That's how long Bales had to decide the fate of the Apollo program. Behind Bales sat 24-year-old Jack Garman, a computer specialist who had spent months studying every program alarm the guidance software could generate. Garman was one of those essential background figures who never appeared in newspaper headlines but without whom nothing would have worked. He had created a handwritten cheat sheet listing every possible alarm code and whether it was abort-worthy. The sheet sat on his console, a piece of paper that might save or doom the mission. Emotion value tense/when the 1202 flashed. Garman's eyes went to his notes. His finger traced down the list of alarm codes. There it was. 1202. Executive overflow. The computer had more tasks queued than it could handle in a single cycle. Not a hardware failure. Not a software crash. Just too many things happening at once. The computer was prioritizing, dropping low-importance tasks to focus on guidance. It was working exactly as designed. It's the same one. Garman called to Bales. His voice was steady, but his heart was pounding. If it doesn't keep coming, we're okay. 3 seconds had passed. Bales made his decision. We're go on that alarm. Emotion value tense. His voice carried across mission control, across the vacuum of space, into the ears of 2 men descending toward a world where any mistake would be their last. Charlie Duke transmitted to Eagle. Roger. We got you. We're go on that alarm. 3 seconds. 1 call. The mission continued. Emotion value tense, but the alarms didn't stop. Over the next several minutes, 4 more 1202 warnings flashed, plus 1 1201, a related overflow condition. Each time, Bales and Garman assessed the situation. Each time, they determined the computer was overloaded but functional, struggling but not failing. Each time, They called go. What was causing the overflow? The answer wouldn't become clear until after the mission, when engineers traced the problem to an obscure interaction between the rendezvous radar and the guidance computer. A switch had been left in the wrong position, a tiny procedural error in a checklist containing thousands of steps. This caused the radar to feed continuous data into a system that wasn't expecting it, consuming processing cycles that the computer needed for descent guidance. The computer, forced to handle this unexpected input while also managing the most complex landing sequence ever attempted, kept running out of processing time and triggering alarms. Emotion value tense / that astronauts didn't know this. Mission control didn't know this. They only knew that yellow lights kept flashing and that every second brought them closer to a surface they couldn't abort from safely. They flew on trust, on judgment, on the accumulated wisdom of thousands of hours of training and simulation. Emotion value tense / now imagine yourself in Steve Bales' chair. You're 26 years old, barely out of school by some measures. You've trained for years for this moment. But training isn't the same as reality. The entire world is watching. The president is watching. History is being written in real time. And your decisions will be part of that history forever. And you keep seeing an alarm you've never encountered in simulation, over and over, while two men ride a column of fire toward an alien landscape. Do you trust the cheat sheet? Do you trust your judgment? Do you bet 2 lives and 8 years of national effort on a handwritten note from a colleague who's even younger than you are? Bales did, every single time. Each alarm, each assessment, each call of go. Because that's what preparation is for. That's why you train until the procedures become automatic. Why you study until you understand systems at the deepest level. Why you build teams where trust is absolute and expertise is respected. Emotion value tense / but the alarms were only half the crisis. Emotion value tense / sat approximately 2011 Greenwich Mean Time. The descent reached its most critical phase. Eagle had throttled down to reduce velocity, beginning the final approach to the landing site in the Sea of Tranquility. This was the moment Armstrong had been training for. The point where he would transition from passenger to pilot and manually guide the lunar module to its landing spot. He looked out the window to visually confirm their target. What he saw made his pulse spike. The computer was guiding them straight toward a boulder-strewn crater the size of a football field. Rocks the size of automobiles scattered across the intended landing zone. Sharp-edged debris from some ancient impact, sitting undisturbed for millions of years, waiting to destroy the first spacecraft that tried to set down among them. If they touched down there, Eagle would almost certainly tip over, stranding Armstrong and Aldrin on the lunar surface with no hope of escape. Or worse, the landing legs might puncture, the fuel tanks might rupture, and they would die in a fireball visible from Earth. Armstrong had trained for many scenarios. He had practiced landing approaches hundreds of times in simulators, fighting simulated malfunctions while instructors threw increasingly impossible challenges at him. He was the finest test pilot of his generation, a man who had saved Gemini 8 from disaster by keeping his head when thrusters misfired and his spacecraft began spinning toward destruction. His colleagues described him as the pilot you wanted in your corner when everything went wrong. Emotion value tense / but nothing in his training had prepared him for this specific moment, looking at a death trap through a triangular window while a computer tried to fly him straight into it, with fuel running out and 600 million people watching live. He took manual control. The decision seems obvious in retrospect. Of course you don't land on boulders. Of course you override the computer when you can see danger it cannot perceive. But consider the stakes. Armstrong was overriding a guidance computer that had been meticulously programmed by some of the finest engineers in America, He was flying manually in an environment where fuel was measured in seconds, and any mistake would be instantly fatal. He was abandoning the planned approach that Mission Control had calculated, approved, and simulated 100 times. What if his judgment was wrong? What if the computer had been steering them toward the safest possible landing site, and his manual override was about to fly them into something worse? What if the boulder field extended in every direction, and there was nowhere safe to land? Emotion value tense. He couldn't know. He could only see what was in front of him, make his best assessment, and act. That's what test pilots did. That's what human judgment meant when algorithms ran out of answers. He did it anyway, because he could see what the computer couldn't see. Context. Visual reality. The difference between a mathematically perfect landing point and a survivable one. This is the moment that defines what happened on July 20th, 1969. Not just human courage, though there was plenty of that. Not just technological achievement, though the engineering was extraordinary. The moment that mattered most was when a human being recognized that machines have limits, that algorithms cannot account for every variable, and that sometimes the only path to success runs through human judgment and human skill. Emotion value tense. Armstrong flew eagle sideways, scanning the surface for a flat spot. The lunar module wasn't designed for this kind of flying. It was an ungainly machine, all angles and protrusions, built for vacuum operations rather than aerodynamic elegance. But Armstrong coaxed it through the thin pillar of thrust, tilting the spacecraft to move laterally while still descending, burning fuel with every second of deviation from the planned approach. Behind him, 60,000 miles away, in Mission Control, flight controllers watched their displays with mounting alarm. They could see the fuel gauge dropping, the numbers ticking down toward zero. They could hear Aldrin's calm voice calling out altitude and descent rate. They could do absolutely nothing to help except watch and pray and hope that Armstrong's skills were as extraordinary as his reputation suggested. Emotion value tense. 400 feet, down at 9. Aldrin's voice maintained its mechanical rhythm. This was his role, feeding Armstrong the data he needed to fly, keeping his commander aware of altitude, velocity, and attitude while Armstrong focused on finding a safe landing spot. They had practiced this partnership 1,000 times, and now it was all that stood between them and disaster. Emotion value tense. Charlie Duke's voice from Houston. 60 seconds. 60 seconds of fuel remaining. 1 minute until the descent engine starved and Eagle dropped like a stone from whatever altitude they had reached. 1 minute until a controlled landing became an uncontrolled crash. Emotion value tense. Armstrong kept searching. The ground below showed more craters, more boulders, more death traps disguised as landing sites. The lunar surface, which had looked so smooth and inviting from orbit, revealed itself as a minefield of obstacles when viewed from 50 feet overhead. Every flat area had a boulder nearby. Every clear zone had a crater rim waiting to catch a landing leg. Emotion value tense. His heart rate climbed to 150 beats per minute. The only time in his entire career that he showed physiological signs of stress on monitoring equipment. His voice remained calm because that's what test pilots did. They trained themselves to speak slowly and clearly no matter what was happening, because panic in the voice caused panic in the listeners. But his body knew exactly how close they were to dying. Emotion value 10/350 feet, down at 4. Aldrin's callouts continued in a steady rhythm, giving Armstrong the altitude and velocity data he needed to make split-second decisions. This was their partnership in action, honed through months of training. Aldrin on the instruments, Armstrong on the controls. Two halves of a single flying organism. A motion value 10/40 feet. Down 2.5. Picking up some dust. The exhaust from the descent engine was beginning to disturb the lunar surface, kicking up clouds of fine gray powder that had sat undisturbed for billions of years. The dust obscured Armstrong's view, adding yet another complication to an approach that had already accumulated more than any simulation had ever thrown at him. A motion value 30 seconds. Charlie Duke's voice carried no panic, just information. 30 seconds of fuel. Half a minute between triumph and disaster. 600 million people watching live, with no tape delay, no editing, no ability to cut away if the worst happened. Whatever occurred next would happen in front of the entire human race. Armstrong spotted his landing site, a relatively flat area, clear of major obstacles, just barely within reach of his remaining fuel. It wasn't the planned landing zone. It wasn't even close to the target the computer had been aiming for. But it looked survivable. And at this point, survivable was all that mattered. He committed. Emotion value 10/20 feet. Down 2. Emotion value 10/they descent slowed. The engine kicked up more lunar dust, obscuring his view of the surface entirely. He flew by instruments now, trusting Aldrin's callouts, trusting his own feel for the vehicle, trusting that the flat spot he'd seen was actually flat and not hiding some final obstacle that would flip them over at the moment of touchdown. Contact light. The ore probe extending from Eagle's footpad touched lunar soil. The light on the instrument panel told Armstrong what his eyes couldn't see through the dust. They had reached the surface. He shut down the engine immediately, before the exhaust could bounce back from the ground and damage the spacecraft. Eagle dropped the final few feet and settled onto the moon. Silence. The engine had stopped. The dust was settling. Two human beings sat on the surface of another world. Then Aldrin's voice. Okay. Engine stop. ACA out of detent. Time or site game, but the discipline of procedure reasserting itself even in this moment of triumph. Armstrong and Aldrin began safing the spacecraft, making sure they could lift off again if necessary, making sure the lunar module wouldn't tip over on unstable ground. The moment stretched, elongating, the entire world holding its breath. Then Neil Armstrong, speaking words that had been prepared in advance but delivered with genuine emotion. His voice slightly unsteady for the only time in the entire descent. Houston. Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed. Charlie Duke's response carried the relief of an entire control room, of 400,000 engineers and technicians who had worked toward this moment for 8 years. Roger. Tranquility Base. We copy you on the ground. You got a bunch of guys about to turn blue. We're breathing again. Thanks a lot. They had done it. 12 minutes and 36 seconds of terror. 5 computer alarms. A last-minute manual override. 30 seconds of fuel remaining. And they had actually done it. 2 human beings sat on the surface of another world for the first time in human history. In mission control, grown men wept. Gaina Krantz, the flight director who never showed emotion, allowed himself a moment of pure joy before calling his team back to order. There was still work to do. The astronauts had to prepare for their moonwalk. They had to be ready to launch again if something went wrong. The mission wasn't over yet. But for that one moment, everyone understood what they had accomplished together. Kennedy's impossible promise, fulfilled with 5 months to spare. A foothold on another world. Proof that human beings could set audacious goals and achieve them through determination, skill, and teamwork. What does that moment really mean? Beyond the flag planting and the footprints and the famous words, what did the 1202 crisis teach us? Start with the obvious lesson: technology has limits. The Apollo guidance computer was the most sophisticated flight computer ever built for its time. It had been programmed with extraordinary care by engineers who understood that lives depended on every line of code. And it nearly aborted the mission because of an unanticipated interaction between two systems that weren't supposed to talk to each other. Does that sound familiar? Think about every time an algorithm has produced an unexpected result because it encountered a situation its designers didn't anticipate. Think about autonomous vehicles making strange decisions because their training data didn't include edge cases. Think about medical diagnostic AI systems flagging false positives because human bodies don't always match statistical models. Think about high-frequency trading algorithms causing flash crashes when market conditions deviate from historical patterns. The 1202 alarm wasn't a bug. It was a feature. The computer was doing exactly what it had been programmed to do: alert the crew when processing demands exceeded capacity. The problem was context. The computer couldn't know that the overflow was caused by a harmless radar anomaly rather than a catastrophic system failure. Only humans could make that distinction. This brings us to the second lesson. Human judgment remains irreplaceable in high-stakes situations. Steve Bales had 3 seconds to decide whether to abort. He made that decision not by consulting additional algorithms or running diagnostic routines, but by trusting his understanding of the system and the expertise of his colleagues. When Neil Armstrong saw the boulder field, he didn't ask the computer for an alternative landing site. He took control and flew by instinct and skill. Today, we face constant pressure to automate decision-making. Algorithms recommend what we should buy, what news we should read, what medical treatments we should receive, even who we should date. These tools are powerful and often useful. But the Apollo lesson suggests that some decisions shouldn't be delegated to machines, no matter how sophisticated those machines become. Think about it from a modern perspective. How many times have you ignored a computer's recommendation because you could see something the computer couldn't? How many times has an automated system tried to lead you down a path that looked optimal on paper but felt wrong in your gut? How many times has context made all the difference between a good decision and a catastrophic one? The astronauts and controllers who landed Eagle trusted machines when machines deserved trust and overrode them when human judgment proved superior. That balance, that partnership between human and artificial intelligence, may be the most important legacy of the 1202 crisis. There's another lesson here, one that often gets overlooked in retellings of this story. The people who made the critical decisions were young. Steve Bales was 26. Jack Garman was 24. Many of the flight controllers in mission control hadn't yet turned 30. These weren't grizzled veterans with decades of experience. They were skilled professionals who had trained intensively, but had never faced anything like this in real operations. How did they perform so well? The answer lies in preparation and trust. NASA had spent years developing training programs, simulations, and decision-making frameworks that pushed people to their limits and beyond. The flight controllers knew their systems intimately, understood not just how they worked, but why they worked, what could go wrong, and what the warning signs looked like. They had practiced failure scenarios until their responses became automatic, until the gap between recognition and action shrank to almost nothing. And they trusted each other. This might be the most important factor of all. When Bales needed information about the alarm, he didn't have to ask permission to consult Garmin. When Garmin had the answer, he didn't have to run it up a chain of command. The organization was designed to put expertise at the point of decision, to empower people to act on their knowledge in real time. This is the organizational lesson of Apollo. Excellence comes from preparation, not from hierarchical authority or rigid protocols. Modern organizations often struggle with this. Decision-making authority concentrates at the top. Information flows through bureaucratic channels. The people who know the most about a situation are often the last to be consulted about what to do. The 1202 crisis suggests this approach is backwards. In moments of genuine crisis, you need your experts making decisions, not waiting for instructions from above. You need people who understand systems deeply enough to recognize when alarms are false positives and when they're genuine emergencies. You need teams where trust is so complete that information flows instantly and decisions happen at the speed of events. 6 hours after landing, Neil Armstrong opened the hatch and descended to the lunar surface. The world watched grainy, ghostly television images as he climbed down the ladder and prepared to take his first step. The camera, mounted on the side of the lunar module, showed a suited figure moving carefully, testing each rung before committing his weight. That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. But that step was only possible because of the decisions made during descent. The step mattered because of the 3-second judgment call. The giant leap for mankind rested on the shoulders of a 26-year-old who trusted his training and his team and made the right call when everything was on the line. After the mission, Bales received a Medal of Freedom along with the astronauts and key mission personnel. He later said that the 1202 decision was the most significant moment of his life. Not because he was brave, but because he was prepared. The preparation made the call possible. The years of study, the handwritten cheat sheets, the trust between colleagues. All of it came together in those 3 seconds. Here's what I want you to take from this story. The moon landing wasn't achieved by superhumans with abilities beyond ordinary people. It was achieved by smart, dedicated professionals who prepared obsessively, trusted each other completely, and kept their heads when everything seemed to be going wrong. Armstrong didn't know he would face a boulder field until he saw it. Bales didn't know he would see a 1202 alarm until it flashed. Collins didn't know if his crewmates would return until Eagle docked with Columbia 21 hours after landing. They all faced uncertainty, and they all made choices without perfect information. That's what heroism actually looks like. Not fearlessness, but action despite fear. Not omniscience, but judgment under uncertainty. Not superhuman ability, but human skill pushed to its limits. The moving computer that nearly aborted Apollo 11 was doing exactly what it was designed to do. The humans who overrode it were taking a genuine risk based on incomplete information. Both were essential. Neither could have succeeded alone. Today, we face our own versions of the 1202 alarm. Automated systems make recommendations. Algorithms process data beyond human comprehension. Artificial intelligence promises to solve problems we can barely understand. The temptation is to defer to these systems, to trust the machine because it processes faster than we can think. But sometimes the machine is heading for a boulder field. Sometimes the alarm is overload, not failure. Sometimes the only path to success runs through human judgment, human skill, and the courage to say we're go when every instinct screams abort. The men and women who landed Eagle on the moon more than 5 decades ago weren't fundamentally different from you. They were ordinary people who prepared extraordinarily, who trusted their colleagues completely, and who made decisions under pressure that changed the course of human history. When you face your own 3-second moment, remember Steve Bales. Remember the cheat sheet, the trust, the preparation that made the impossible call possible. Remember that expertise matters, that teamwork matters, that the ability to make good decisions under pressure is a skill that can be developed through deliberate practice. And remember that sometimes being go isn't about certainty. It's about being ready to act when certainty isn't available. 600 million people watched the eagle land. They saw a triumph. They didn't see the 12:02 alarms, the boulder field, the 30 seconds of fuel. They didn't see Steve Bales with 3 seconds to decide, or Neil Armstrong flying manual with his heart racing at 150 beats per minute. Now you know what they didn't show you. Now you know what it actually took to put human footprints on the moon. And maybe, when your own alarm flashes, you'll be ready to call go.